everybody. Welcome to Learning the Scottish Great Highland Bagpipe with me, J.D. Ingram, pipe major of the Charleston Pipe Band. This week we're going to be learning
Lesson 29, Mastering the Great Highland Bagpipes. Your goal in this lesson is to be able to properly adjust your reeds, hemp your joints, season bags if necessary, change bags when necessary, and troubleshoot other issues that may pop up. Your homework is to play a gig in public with the band or solo. I'm a firm believer in the idea that any difficult thing can be broken down into just a handful of more manageable things. Sometimes you have to break those things down a step further, but it's all possible to manage really any gargantuan task in bite-sized chunks, just like the idea of eating an elephant, one bite at a time. If we're going to master the Great Highland Bagpipes, there are three things that I think we need to master that are sub-aspects of being a great bagpiper. First is have good finger work. Second is have a good sounding instrument. And third is to have good presentation. Breaking down good finger work further, I believe that we need to focus on the big notes, clean playing, which means playing the right note at the right time with no crossing noises, the embellishments, which is your grace notes, the steps of your embellishments, and how your embellishments work rhythmically within the music, and of course the musical expression, because what's the point of playing music if it's not musical? This is the stuff that we've been working on for the last 28 lessons now. So this is just a good way to kind of structure all of that in your mind. But for what we're going to talk about in the rest of this video is Section 2. Section 2 of the 3 easy steps to being a great bagpiper is have a good sounding instrument. The 3 sub-aspects of a good sounding instrument are maintenance, blowing, and tuning. You might have seen this in other places or in other lessons in my series, but it's worth reiterating. These are absolutely key. All right, one of the things you might find yourself doing if you are making sure you have a well-maintained bagpipe is hemping a joint, and that is not a drug reference. So you get some, usually yellow, sometimes black or other colors, cotton hemp string, and I very much recommend using waxed if you're doing it on a stock, which is what I'm doing today. I need a little bit of extra hemp on my bass drone stock. So when you go, I usually start with a line down the joint and then around and over like that so that it will stay in place, and then pull very tightly and wrap it around. If I was doing this fresh and there was no hemp on here before, I would make sure to line every single string up right next to it, all the way down and all the way back. And usually it takes 3 or 4 passes all the way down and back before it's getting close to tight. After that, you start going a little looser like I am right now to kind of fill in the gaps and tighten it up. And then when you're done, I can just pull that off. You can also use a knife, make sure it's good and tight, and then you want to test it in the joint. Nice and careful so I don't chip the reed, and make sure that takes 2 hands and a little bit of muscle. And make sure I can undo it. That feels about right. It's difficult, but I don't feel like I'm about to actually break the whole thing. Yeah, that's good. Another tip is when you're doing it to get yourself a hard surface. Ideally, especially with waxed hemp, just some like scrap wood, a I've got an old chair leg and a scrap piece of wood here, and you can actually compress the hemp down by rolling it between the two. This is not going to be a good angle for me because I'm up here at the camera, but typically I would do this on the floor. I would compress the hemp down real tight before doing the joint check, and that makes sure sometimes if it's a little loose on here, when I do the joint check, it pushes it all up against the little mount here, and you end up with kind of a little pyramid conical shape of hemp where it's real tight here and kind of loose here, and it's not good for your joint. But compressing it all down in place makes it a nice cylinder where it's got contact the whole way down, and it's better in your joint. Since I was just tightening this up, I didn't do that, but I typically do that when I'm starting from scratch. So, hard surface, keep yourself some scrap wood around. And the next thing you might do is start to calibrate your reeds. So I am actually working on a new chanter reed today, and I thought I would share it with you guys after I get my drones back together. That's about right. So I've got my chanter, got my box of reeds so they stay nice and taken care of, and I'm going to just pick one at random here. How about this guy? It's good to make sure that your reeds have square corners and a little too bright there. You can see down the mouth of the reed there. That is, if you couldn't see down the mouth because it's so shut, it's probably gonna be a reed that is a little easy, squeaks easier. You might have some other issues there. If it's gaping, if it looks like you could actually like eat something substantial, then it's probably gonna take a whole lot of air to get it vibrating, and especially if you're a beginner, that might be too hard. But just a little bit of space in there where you can just barely see down it, that's nice. Good sharp corners, no other obvious defects. Sometimes you'll see when they've been banged around in the box, you'll have a little dog ear. That reed's gonna be more pain than it's worth. And then set it in my chanter, seat it nice and deep. My chanter is threaded, which is nice. Some chanters are, some chanters are not. But so if I twist it, it gets in there tight. And like always, I can hold the chanter by the reed. That means it's seated deeply enough. Another thing you do when you're getting a new reed going is you can test how difficult it is to blow by using a pressure meter. I have a nice little water manometer here hooked up. And so this tube is going to plug into my drone. That will take the pressure coming out of my drone and blow the water. And you can see the yellow line. I've put some food coloring in the water so it's easier for you guys to see. And I can see how much pressure it's taking. Ideally, I want the chanter to start making sound at a fairly low pressure so it's not difficult to make sound. And I want it to start squeaking, to be overblown at a fairly high pressure, which means I've got a lot of range of, a lot of give in a reed before it is overblown. I don't want it to start too low because then it will be difficult to strike in without a squeak. And I don't want the top to be too high because then it'll be, typically means that it will be taking a lot of air. So there's kind of some finagling to get used to, find your sweet spot. I'm gonna plug this into my outer tenor here. If you want to make a homemade water manometer just like this one, I will link to some instructions I found online how to make them. I actually bought this one off of a store that doesn't sell them anymore, so can't help you there. But here we go. So you can already see that The water level's up here, and the reed hasn't started yet. So right about there is where the chanter starts. And right about there is where it squeaks. You test for squeaks by doing a high G or a high A grace note on a low A or low G. Large transitions is where you're going to first identify a squeak. So if you're playing here and you do a large transition, probably no squeaks, but if you let off very slightly, your reed's going to cut out, which is not a good thing to do in performance. If you're playing here and you go up any higher, you might have a reed squeak. So it's important to stay somewhere in between the two. Typically, I would recommend in the top half, closer to the top, because you're more likely to let off than you are to overblow, unless of course the reed is just way too easy for you. Also, blowing the reed more fully tends to make the reed sound just a touch more rich, and that's always nice. So I found my choke off point where my chanter stops playing, and I found my squeak point, and I'm going to repeat the process with a couple more reeds and find one that I like before we move on to the next part. To reiterate, the key aspects of having a good sounding bagpipe are sometimes referred to as the tree of sound. The tree of sound is maintenance. That is, do you have an airtight bag? Do you have tight hemp? And do you have calibrated reeds? Blowing, that is, are you blowing consistently? Are you not allowing your blowing to vary because of distractions around you or difficult points in the music? And are you blowing at the correct pressure for your reeds? And tuning, that is your chanter in tune with itself? Is your chanter in tune with your drones? And are your drones balanced and harmonious amongst each other? All right, as we're adjusting our bagpipes to make them all calibrated and in sync and easy to play, the next thing you're going to probably want to do is adjust your drones so that they work well with your chanter. Now I've identified a reed. I've got my point where the chanter comes in and my point where the chanter starts squeaking marked. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to find out where my drones are can be overblown. So I'm going to blow up. I've got one tenor being used to run the pressure meter, so I'm going to use the other tenor to identify where they cut off. So if you saw, my other tenor didn't choke off until way up here. I can set my chanter or my drones to be easier so that they cut off somewhere right about here, and that saves me a little bit of air that's going out of my bag and makes them easier to play. It also can save you in a situation where if you're playing in the middle of a set, maybe with a band or something, and you have a reed that's double toning or something, you can actually just real quickly overblow and cut off your drones. And while that's not necessarily advised all the time, it is something that you can do in a pinch. But if your drones take some insane amount of pressure to overblow, it's a whole lot of air going out of your bag that's not being put to good use, and it limits your ability to cut them off if you want to on purpose. So what I'm going to do now is take out my middle tenor and adjust. We've talked about adjusting reeds before. I'm going to adjust the bridle so that it takes less air, because remember it was way up here and I want it to take just a little bit less air. And baby steps, I'm moving this thing a hair's breadth, just barely enough to see that it is actually in fact moving. All right, let's see what that did. Back in, lower up. So it was a little closer. It was right about there. I'm going to do that one more time. See if I can get it just barely above the red point. That's probably enough. Again, maybe not even the width of a human hair. And it's already halfway there, so. Just above the red line. So now my middle tenor is calibrated to my chanter. What I'll do next is take the pressure meter out, get the two tenors so that they cut off together, and the bass so it cuts off at a similar or maybe slightly higher. I've heard really good pipers say that your bass should take just that much more air. So I'll do that after this video. Before I cut though, I want to talk about two more things. So a pressure meter is a really handy way to test yourself to see if you're blowing steady. Watching a tuning meter is good. You can try to blow a low A, watch your meter, if it says you're sharp, that's fine. If it says you're flat, that's fine. What you want to do is practice holding the needle steady with a steady tone, but better than a tuning meter is a pressure meter. So I can sit here and watch and even play a tune and try to make sure that that water level stays steady. So something like this. Take two. Cork came out. All right, here we go. Right? So that's watching it, which is good because I've got feedback all the time and I can make real-time adjustments. The next step above that would be to not watch it, plug it in, film it where you can't see it, so you guys can watch it but I can't, and see if you're able to do it, when you're on stage and you don't have a pressure meter to tell you if you're blowing steady. So I didn't see that. I can't comment on how well I did right now, but you guys can, and maybe afterwards I can look back and comment on, wow, I did a really good job, or maybe I didn't do as good of a job. But that's a good practice to get into, to practice blowing steady, making sure that bagpipe is just smack on, in tune, steady blowing. That's your second of the three parts of the tree of sound. You've maintained your pipe, you set up your pipe, now you're blowing steady. And then within tuning, one more trick I want to talk about before I cut this video. This is called, I refer to it as the let-off method, but basically the principle is when your blowing changes, your chanter is going to move in pitch more than your drones. So if I'm blowing steady right here and then I let off a little bit, my drones will come down, will be just very slightly flatter, but my chanter will be a lot flatter, which means they're out of tune now with each other. So that's where steady blowing is really important. But you can use it to your advantage. If you're out of tune between your chanter and your drones, try letting off a little bit. If it sounds better, if it sounds more in tune, what had happened was your chanter was sharp and it came down to your drones. If it sounds worse, try blowing a little harder. And if that sounds better, then what happened was your chanter was flat and it sharpened up to your drones. Now maybe you like how your chanter sounds and you adjust your drums, to be where your chanter was. But that can be a trick to let you know. So an example, I'll do it with my tenor drone and just pick a note. So that's out of tune. It sounded better before it cut off, so I was blowing the tenor up. Since the tenor was getting sharper, I'm going to flatten the drum. Still a little. Now it's too far. That's in tune. So what I found was, originally it was out of tune. I blew harder and it sounded better, which meant my chanter was flatter than my tenor. I didn't want to move the chanter, so I decided to move the tenor. I made the tenor, since my chanter was flatter than the tenor, I made the tenor flatter to come down to the chanter. I made like 2 adjustments, and then I had actually passed where it was. So then I had to go back the other way just a little bit until I could hear that nice resonant without that beating sound. So a couple tricks and tips, there we go, to make sure your pipes are well set up, that your blowing is steady, and that you're going to get your pipes in tune successfully. Cool. We're almost there, guys. This is awesome stuff. Thanks for watching again this week, guys. Some final thoughts for you. Move your fingers right, and that means no crossing noises. Take good care of your instrument. Pay attention to that tree of sound. And of course, present yourself well. Act like you know what you're doing, and people will think you know what you're doing. But above all, focus. Take care, guys.